The White House has released a statement overnight welcoming Australia's decision to join international airstrikes in northern Iraq against Islamic State militants. The White House statement also welcomes a similar decision taken by Denmark as international support grows for the fight.
But how long will it take? What's the ultimate aim of the airstrikes? And will the coalition have no choice but to send in ground forces? To talk through the issues now, we're joined by Malcolm Jorgensen from the US Studies Centre. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Now, in some previous articles you've written, you've said that Mr Abbott hasn't shown that he's learnt the lessons of the previous Iraq war. What are those lessons?
Well, the overall lesson is that the most important objective is to establish government authority within the region, wherever that is. And so there are these consequences that have flown from the 2003 Iraq invasion, which Australia supported, which is that there was some vision of how the region could be better. But by removing established government authority, it does create this incentive for any radical group who has some alternative vision to come into the region and to try and re-establish an alternative way of doing things. So that's precisely what's happened here. So in combination with the consequences of the Arab Spring, we're now seeing this breakdown in authority in the region. So that's really the key problem.
The problem, obviously, in fighting Islamic State militants is it's a very nebulous sort of organisation. And you've made the point that their biggest objective that they succeeded in doing is not so much capturing territory, but capturing world attention. And Tony Abbott alluded to that yesterday when he said it's difficult to eliminate an ideology. Is that the problem here?
Absolutely. I mean, it's part of the way that ISIS has had some success in Australia, if you like. When you see examples of bigotry or racism here, part of the strategy of ISIS is to divide countries in the West, to create this idea that there really is this division between Islam and the rest. And so anybody who fosters that is actually, in a sense, working for ISIS. This does play then into the way of responding to ISIS as a strategy, and part of that is to deny the Islamic elements to that group. And so they claim to be the Islamic State, and so measures in this country and elsewhere, statements by imams and so forth, denying the character of the group as an Islamic group, is part of that response to that and winning hearts and minds.
So do you see the conflict in Iraq, the previous conflict, as directly responsible to the rise of this extremist jihadist group?
Well, when there's a complete breakdown in a system, as we've seen here, there's almost certainly a confluence of factors. But certainly the 2003 war is one of those. So the group Al-Qaeda in Iraq was the predecessor to ISIS. They were the most forceful group responding to the established government in 2004 after the invasion. That group was gradually degraded, but did make their way into Syria, where they were re-established. And they were able to do that because of the consequences of the Arab Spring. So again, it's not a sole cause, but it's pretty hard to deny that there is this lineage that goes through that ISIS can trace back to the 2003 invasion.
Let's talk about the strategy then in confronting this. And Prime Minister Tony Abbott yesterday said on a number of occasions this is about disrupting and degrading Islamic State forces. And I think he was essentially echoing comments made by Barack Obama. They're not talking about defeating, they're talking about disrupting and degrading. Can you make that point of difference?
There is notionally this idea that they will ultimately defeat the group, but the focus on degrading does give this wiggle room that this is in fact what's happening now. It's because they're going to be so firmly entrenched in the region. I mean, the strategy at the moment is to use airstrikes, for instance, but where the groups are within civilian areas, it's pretty hard to actually completely eliminate them. A sign of success, Tony Abbott has talked about if they're in retreat, that's some sign of success. I would suggest that given the idea of the Islamic State, denying them the features of statehood would really be a sign of some success here. So under international law, that includes in particular having a defined territory which they can call their own, a structure of governance within that region, and that's what they've established now. Through these actions, we can start to deny them that territory and disrupt that government, as has been done through airstrikes in their nominal capital in Syria. So that is some evidence of success.
If the biggest risk here is the sort of that these jihadist groups occupy power vacuums, do you have any concerns that this conflict might affect the Assad regime and in a sense open the door for IS to really take a hold in Syria, a greater hold?
Yeah, well, that's the most difficult issue in this whole resolution, which is this idea that we're attacking the Islamic State and are going to do so in Syria. But in doing so, the Islamic State themselves have been fighting the Assad regime. And so it does allow some wiggle room for Assad. And so despite the fact that that regime has disagreed with these strikes, they've actually said that they are okay or been very quiet about them as a response. You can see some shift, I would suggest, in the Obama administration's response to this. The president admitted as much in an interview recently and said, well, the main objective here is to defeat ISIS. And so making that the primary objective makes it clear that this may be the trade-off, that it may strengthen the Assad regime, but that is part of re-establishing authority, and that's really where any justice will flow from, is having some form of order in the region.
When we speak of Syria, certainly Australia and the UK have ruled out intervention in Syria. We've just had news, of course, that Turkey is now considering some intervention in Syria, and the Syrians have warned that would have dire consequences.
Well, there's a direct interest that the Turkish government has in re-establishing control in Syria because there is an attempt to take the border crossings between Syria and Turkey. A good indication of why it is appropriate to take some action in Syria is that the politics and the law line up pretty well on this. That is that there is some provision under international laws, perhaps a little controversial, but that we can assist Iraq in its own self-defense by retaking areas that are ungoverned within Syria from which terrorist attacks are being launched. That's also good for the strategy that we're following here, but it also, the limitation is that that legal authority doesn't allow a form of regime change within Syria, and so that's illegal, but would also be bad strategy because those countries which are supporting the United States and Australia in this initiative are particularly Shia countries, and Iraq itself would immediately fall apart from that coalition if there was then some attempt to actually topple the Assad regime.
All right. Malcolm Jorgensen from the US Studies Centre, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.